Greetings, everyone. We're ready to begin the last, but certainly not least, of the speaker series, Innovation Engagement. Barbara and I were having a conversation earlier. We're now going to call her the Precipitation Queen, because whenever she comes, it's either a snowstorm or rain, and I think they had like thunder showers. Up in my corner of the world, there was thunder and lightning and buildings shaking. So. For those of you who are not familiar with Barbara Schilberg and her work, Barbara is she is a cornerstone of a lot of the important work that's happened in this region in developing startups, dating all the way back to, was it Morgan Lewis? At Morgan Lewis, and then she got recruited into Cephalon by our late, great, departed friend, Frank Baldino, which is how Barbara and I met. She then became the founding and still CEO of BioAdvance, the Commonwealth's commitment to startups and sort of moving the needle on creating opportunity for new development. And of the 3 greenhouses that were created as part of that legislation, I can tell you that BioAdvance has far and away exceeded all expectations compared to the other 2 greenhouses and compared to almost any other entity that gets government money for these purposes. So she's extraordinary in a lot of different ways. She came with a toolbox, and now she's got multiple toolboxes, including having to wend her way through Harrisburg and make people who might not otherwise see the value of this kind of get it. And it's important that they get it so that they continue to be part of what's happening. So, but before I bring Barbara to the microphone, I want to spend a moment on Jazz Tank. Who's coming to Jazz Tank? Yeah. Happy to see those hands coming up. So for those of you who don't know about Jazz Tank, you can go to the website to get more information, but it's Tuesday, April 18th. We're closed for submissions. Happy to report that we have over 100 submissions this year from not only Jefferson. We opened it up. As you may remember, we first did Jazz Tank, and we wanted to organically grow what was happening at Jefferson, and now we've sort of opened the viewfinder, and boy, is it open. We've actually got a presentation coming from Israel. There are a couple of guys that decided that this was kind of worth coming for. So if you have not been to Jazz Tank before, come just for the fun of watching and think about whether or not you can think your way into being part of it for next year. And this is, so just as we go through the presentation, you're welcome to, we'll do a Q&A at the end as we always do, but for those of you that are streaming, you can tweet questions to us and we'll bring them to Barbara's attention. So, so let me just turn the microphone over to this extraordinary woman. She rocks in everything she does. Barbara Schilberg.
Yikes, that's quite the build-up and a lot of pressure here. Plus, I know I'm the last event of the season or the series, so I'm delighted to be here. I agree. If anybody ever has a drought problem, call me, because I can solve it. So I think in February I was supposed to be following Imasagi, who talked about the national venture capital scene. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on here locally, or regionally, I should say, both from the standpoint of what we're doing, but what we're seeing in terms of trends and things like that. And the bottom line is it's a really competitive world out there if you're trying to get money for startups. And so I'll wrap it up by talking a little bit about the kinds of things that are really important when you think about whether your technology is investable. So, what the heck am I doing here? Which one is, oh, wait, there we go. Okay, so just to recap probably what Osagie talked a little bit about, why do we even talk about venture capital? And the reason we talk about venture capital is it's a really critical piece of the stages of development. It funds and supports a critical piece of development, early stage technology. It started off in the 70s or 80s in the tech sector, and venture capital is just private capital. It's not the kind of money that companies get when they're going to the New York Stock Exchange or Amex or something like that. And the idea is it's supposed to take risks, and it's also supposed to be compensated well, so for taking the risk. So we call it high risk, high reward money. And you can see originally it was set up that the taxpayer money basically funds basic research. Then the private capital steps in terms of venture capital, takes it to the next step where it's mature enough for a company to actually access capital in the public markets. And it worked beautifully all the way through the 70s, 80s. It really matured as a sector of our economy in the 90s. And then, I don't know if some of you may remember the tech bubble. I don't even remember what triggered it, to be honest, but it was big, and you know, there were high valuations in the public markets. Everybody was making money and gazillions of dollars, and all of a sudden it just exploded, and everything collapsed. And with that, all of a sudden, you know, however the public markets go, the private markets go even worse. So with the disappearance of the public markets, private capital just sort of stepped to the side and stopped investing in early stage technologies. So you can see all of a sudden there's this huge gap for things that were at the post-grant stage. This is just another way of doing it, and it sort of shows in the life sciences what was going on with the relative amounts of capital. So the top line shows NIH funding, and the bars show the early stage funding that was available. And you can see, leading up to the tech bubble through the 90s, there was a good sort of a nice proportion of money available. So lots of NIH money and lots of private capital. And also the tech bubble burst. All of a sudden, coincidentally, the NIH started getting more and more money to put out into grants. So it really exacerbated the problem. And then we came along a couple years later as everybody was feeling the pain from the lack of this early stage capital. So the Pennsylvania solution, and this is something Donna was heavily involved with and gets a lot of credit for. I'm going to touch on it. It's sort of now irrelevant, but it's so inspiring to realize that our government, you know, our legislators and our governors came together and did something with a long range. They did it collaboratively, and it was a really intelligent piece of legislation. So it's a reminder that what's possible when government functions. Oh, shoot. Oh. Okay, well, we aren't going to worry about that. Yeah, I think, yeah. Precipitation. You see? See? Thanks, that's fine. It's just water. It's just water.
Just make sure you don't have your bicycle.
No, I got it. Okay, well, that was an interesting distraction. Okay. So, in Pennsylvania, right around 2001, some of you may recall there was the tobacco settlements. A lot of the states had been suing the tobacco companies, and states were allowed to settle and work out arrangements. Pennsylvania at the time was working out its settlement with the tobacco, and to the credit of everybody involved, they basically said, we really need to do something in the spirit of the settlement and do something that promotes, we're going to take some of this money, it's not taxpayer money, it's kind of money from the tobacco companies, and we're going to devote it to things that really help improve human health. So I think it's a brilliant piece of legislation. And what they did was sort of address, in part, some of the capital problems. So they set aside a big chunk of money for basic research. Then they set up 3 greenhouses. Donna alluded to those. We were the proof of concept funding. We got $100 million, which sounds like a lot of money, although in reality it's not. But each of us got $33 million. There's a greenhouse in Pittsburgh, and there's one in Harrisburg along with us. And then they also put aside money for venture capital, and we invested in 4 different venture capital funds. So it created this continuum of capital, trying to restore kind of that nice ecosystem that worked before the tech bubble. Our founders were all throughout the community. It was institutions, it was pharmaceutical companies, it was community citizens, all came together, and Donna was really instrumental in all of this happening. So we got started, and we, in the Philadelphia area, looked around and said, boy, there are a lot of things you don't need. We had incubator space, we had tons of science. What we really decided to do was focus on the capital gap for early stage proof of concept funding. So we set aside 20 million of our 33 million. We focused on we had the world's smallest footprint. We only had 5 counties to work with, but they were great counties. The model is, and this is one of the insights behind the legislation, the idea was, here, take a bolus of money and make a business out of it, make it sustainable, make it work, and don't keep coming back every year and asking for $10 million from the state. So that's our goal. And the Pennsylvania asked us that, whatever you do, try and get $3 of private capital in for every dollar that we give you. So that was kind of the mandate. And we did decide to focus, we focused because of the statutory mission, we focused on human health, traditional therapeutics, medical devices, diagnostics. And I think, so this is what the idea was. We were supposed to come in, land, cover the moat where the Valley of Death existed. And it was going to be great. Academic R&D would just go flying straight over the Valley of Death and be on the other side of the venture capital world. So in fact, this is what we got. Not surprisingly, first of all, the Valley of Death was way bigger than anybody thought. And $20 million doesn't really go that far when you think about developing a therapeutic. It takes hundreds of millions of dollars to do that. But nevertheless, we sort of reach ahead and look behind, and we sort of stretched. And it has been successful, so for a lot of different reasons. So we invested, actually, I forgot to update these numbers. I think we've put out $35 million so far because we've grown our fund. Those companies have gone on to attract $2.5 billion. So you remember the 3-to-1 we were supposed to do? We did a lot better than that. I think it's up in the 60s, it's 80, yeah, 80 to 1. 75 companies and technologies have been funded over the 12 or 13-year period. So now, today, we're a $50 million fund. We have money to invest. We are actively putting money on the street. We have expanded. Our original contract with the state was over a couple years ago, although we still occasionally get state money, and we invest it in Pennsylvania when we do that. But otherwise, we have expanded just to reach up to New York and down to DC, sort of the I-95 corridor. And probably the most important change is we now invest in digital health, which we didn't do before. And it's a very exciting sector, especially around here, so there's a lot to be said, and we can talk about that for those who are interested. And we're now investing, we go beyond the seed stage at this point. So in a therapeutics company, we'll put into $2.5–3 million. So in a digital health company, probably $1 million over time. So we've really we're able to invest more per company, or we could do more investments, but we actually prefer to do more per company. We like companies to be well capitalized. So some of our recent investments, and you'll see it's really across the board. There are a couple digital healths, One Health. I'll talk about some of these later. But they're digital health and therapeutics for the most part. And that seems to be a trend. We're doing sort of both ends of the spectrum. So, regional landscape. So this is a great, we only had 5 counties to work with, yet it's a robust, fertile ground. And the reason it's fertile is because we have a ton of science and technology. We have a ton of talent, especially, I would say, in the pharmaceutical world, and I think also now the digital health talent is pretty robust. And we have tons of facilities and increasing every day. So just to remind you, a lot of the technologies, there are a lot of pre-seed programs or incubator programs that have evolved since we got started. So it's a great place for us to find new deals because they're the Jazz Tank that you just heard about, which is great fun, so I highly recommend it if you haven't been there. We have hackathons going on all the time. I mean, the Dream It program in digital health, I think, is one of the reasons that spawned the digital health sector here. QED program at the Science Center, they have phase 1 now, so lots of different sources of technology that's getting kind of refined and polished so that it makes it easier for us to find things that we like. But surprisingly, over 50% of what we see and what we invest in is not from academia. This was probably the biggest surprise to me. But when you think about it, we were going through a lot of pharma layoffs, and people were coming out of pharma with ideas or projects that they had thought about when they were inside and couldn't do. So, those are fine. The problem is they don't come with, $10 million worth of NIH grants behind them, but they still can be viable. So the 3 companies down there were all pharma people who came out and had an idea, and we funded them from inception. And Novera was a huge win. It was sold to J&J a couple of years ago for a lot of money. So we like that one. Growing incubator space, you guys probably track it better than I do. There's a ton of it, and it's all over our region, which I think is great. You know, I'm a little bit in the mode of I don't want to try and imitate Boston. A lot of people say they have, you know, we have to be more like Boston and we have to do this. I think we're Philadelphia. I think we have people all over the place. I think we should just come up with a new vision of how we're going to function as a life sciences center. So I'm thrilled that there are opportunities wherever you're located to have lab space. Co-working space, we have a map, and I'll talk about it at the end. We have a map of life sciences resources in Pennsylvania, and so this just shows one layer. But there are basically, I think, 27 co-working spaces downtown. Doylestown has them, Exton has them. There are just a ton all over the place. So we do try and keep track of them, and you're welcome to use the map. It's publicly available. And then on the workforce side, obviously, we have a long history of pharmaceutical expertise here. And actually, a long history of tech sector expertise. The medical device, I would say, is a little bit light in this region historically and today. But if you think about all the talent coming out of pharma companies, which I think can be translated into the digital health sector, it's actually a pretty robust pool to draw on. And we do it all the time. God, this is going to get me in the end. One of the most exciting things I think that's happening now are the rise of student entrepreneurs. These are 5 of our more recent investments, and they're all students. They may be vet students or engineering students, and a medical student, a couple of them are medical students. Olive Devices, which was a Jazz Tank winner last year, was just a recent grad of the Philadelphia University. So I think this is going to be our future, because one of the things we've lacked in this region are a lot of role models for how to be entrepreneurs, and I think right now we're creating a whole new generation, and I think that's going to be leveraged in future years, so I think it's very exciting. It has its own set of challenges, but because the students have never even seen what a board meeting looks like, much less know how to run one, so, you know, there are things, but we work with the students. So here's the bad news, and this is sort of, I don't know what Osagi talked about in terms of the national. You know, venture capital has never been robust here, and it's just a fact of life. I think we all have to just deal with it and do what we can. We almost always, and historically, we have really attracted capital from outside. So it is possible. In my own view, money does go to good technology. So it does float. It's harder to raise it from outside, but it's not impossible. And as I say, all of our companies have raised $2.5 billion of money. So it is possible, and very little of it was local money. So that's the challenge, I think, and especially for therapeutics companies. Unfortunately, I think we're one of the few groups that does invest in therapeutic programs. So we're always happy to see as many of those as we can. And early stage technologies, you know, it continues to be, there's a shortage, although I found some interesting statistics that I'll touch on in a minute. So this depicts the healthcare venture capital picture in Pennsylvania. You can see that was the market crash in 2008. We have these cycles of market crashes. And you can see we were doing pretty well, and I think it was attributable to the tobacco settlement, because we had 4 venture funds, and they were bringing in syndicate partners, and there was a lot of activity. And then 2008 came, and it's just like it all imploded again. And you can see we've been kind of just flat, but flat's okay. But if you look at below, and I don't know if you can see it, we're really losing our share of venture capital. So we were like up at 7 or 8% before the crash, and we're now down to about 2.5%. So I think that's a troublesome sign. And we deserve, because we have, you know, we're in the top 5 in NIH funding, we really deserve to be higher. So I think that's our challenge. Although I was looking, it was interesting, I was looking at one particular database, and all the databases are sort of semi-valid. But this particular database, I was just counting the deals, like how many deals. And it turns out Pennsylvania has more than our share of seed capital, which I think is largely because of the greenhouses, the Ben Franklins. So we do pretty well. If you look nationally, we have 11% of the seed capital, which is disproportionately high, I think. When you get into the Series A traditional venture world, that's where we're down to. This database had 3%. So I think that's where the problem is. If I had to isolate it, I think that's real. So we're now actually trying to decide if we want to kind of migrate to fill that Series A early stage role. Maybe that's where we should be going. So that's one of our internal discussions. But there are still some regional healthcare investors. If you're looking, there are a lot of angels, and a couple angel groups went into one of our deals, the Novera deal I mentioned, and everybody made a lot of money. So there's a lot of money now available in the angel community. If you want to see where the angels are, some of them are listed. The Angel Capital Association has a great directory. It's free. It's on their website. It isolates it by jurisdiction and geography, so it's very easy to find. I think it has all the website information, so it's a really good resource. And that is sort of where a lot of the money has to come from in our region. So just know that it's not the easiest process in the world, but it's there. Most of the venture is in the digital health space. Again, Osage invests in therapeutics, but only if it's led by, like one of the classic traditional VCs from Boston or West Coast. So as a practical matter, they haven't done many deals here. And then the Bens, everybody knows the Bens. They are the economic development and cut across all sectors, but they do life sciences investing. So to me, the name of the game these days, and this is one of the messages, is you don't look for the traditional venture capital. I mean, don't make that part of your plan. I think you really have to plan for accessing these other kinds of sources. And this is the good news part. There's been a whole world of alternative financing that has grown up since we got started. So the NIH, as you know, somewhat controversially, is doing translational funding and doing clinical trial funding and that sort of thing. The Wellcome Trust throws a ton of money. A bunch of companies around here have received Wellcome Trust money. We have more Wellcome Trust recipients here than Boston or California. So, because I think we do a good job with drug discovery, and I think it's merit-based. Disease foundations, they didn't really do investments in companies when we got started, and now they do. Hard to find, but you have to spend some time figuring out if there's a foundation that does what you do, but it's well worth it. Angels, we talked about. Family offices, that's the whole thing. I still am trying to figure this one out. But there's a lot of wealth in families that is managing and wants to invest in life sciences opportunities, because usually there's a family member that they might care, there's a disease they care about. I'm really doing this. But they're hard to find because they don't really want to be public. So we find them, basically, there are a couple conferences that are set up to kind of attract family offices, and that's how we find them. So we go to those conferences and meet them there. Crowdfunding, none of our companies have actually done crowdfunding after we invested, although a few have done crowdfunding before we invest. And it's actually quite interesting. It's not that easy, but it's viable. So for certain kinds of products, I think it doesn't fit everything, but certain kinds of things, it's fine. So it's harder these days, but there actually are more opportunities to get financing. It just doesn't look like it used to look. And I think and I think Robin and Heather can help figure out what the right path is forward. But we now kind of require that all of our companies have an ability to access this other kind of money, because we can't count on the venture world being there for us. Now, the other thing that's happening, a lot of states are throwing a lot of money at the life sciences. I'm trying to turn this into lemonade. New York just launched basically the equivalent of what Pennsylvania did back in 2001. They're now doing their own initiative, but they're doing it now, and it's fresh money, and it's a lot of money. So they're making some tracks. I'm trying to pretend that New York is a suburb of Philadelphia, and that we're going to leverage that somehow. And in truth, a lot of really good VCs are up there now, and they are willing to jump on a train, and they know how easy it is. So I think it will work to our advantage, but we'll have to work at it. So, but yeah, people are, Pennsylvania is now losing they were a pioneer in 2001, and we're now it would be nice if we could get some momentum back. But in the meantime, we do the best we can with people in our neighboring states. So the bottom line, it is very competitive out there. We have to work really hard. We can't complain. It's always been this way, so it is what it is. So I'll talk just a few minutes about the kinds of things we look at and how we think about investments. And in some ways, these three evaluations, these are the key things that any investor is going to look at. And there are lots of subtopics, but these are the big three. What's interesting is that investors apply these three things differently. So even though they're the same exact topics, the amount of risk somebody will take within one of these factors differs. So it's very individual. There's no one size fits all. And that's part of the magic as well, that when you're looking for somebody who gets what you're doing. And just because you get turned down by one person doesn't mean that the next person isn't going to like it. So investing is very individual and very subjective. So don't get concerned if some people aren't responding well. Just keep looking. So here they are. Do you have a good value proposition? Does anybody watch Shark Tank? I highly recommend it. I love that show, and you can really learn a lot, even though they never do anything in the life sciences, obviously. But you can really learn a lot about how investors think. So I recommend it. The second one is, does the business model work? There are a lot of layers to that, and I'll go into that in a minute. And then, do you have the right team? So as I say, every investor sort of weighs these differently and worries about different things within this, and that's how they get to different results. So on the value proposition, this is pretty basic, but it's the most critical thing, and it's the first thing we look for. So you have to solve a problem for somebody that they're willing to pay for. So if you can't pass that, we often refer to it as what's the unmet medical need. There are different names or terms used for it. But if you can't do that, do not pass go. We don't even get to the rest of the analysis. And this is where I imagine some of the other speakers have talked about. You have to go out and talk to customers. You have to go out and talk to physicians. You have to talk to whoever you think is the beneficiary, and will they pay for it, and do some work. And this is where I think some of the new pre-seed programs that are happening around here do emphasize this. Oh, the I-Corps program at Penn and Dream at Health. I mean, it's really emphasizes sort of the first step is market research, and I think it's exactly the right approach. And you have to be different. I'll talk about how there are some traps in that in some of our sectors that we invest in. And it has to be a significant market. It doesn't have to be a $4 billion market, but it gets back into there has to be enough reward for the amount of money and the risk that goes into the development. And then, is there a case for reimbursement? Unfortunately, we all have to deal with this now, so it's just a fact of life. It seems premature when you're at a really early stage to think about it, and you may not have to make a case. Like, I wouldn't worry too much about the case for reimbursement if you had an Alzheimer's drug, because first of all, nobody has one. But I wouldn't worry. There are some that are obvious, but when you get into medical devices and things like that and diagnostics, you really do have to focus on this. So some of the companies that we've recently invested in, I'll just give you an idea. So One Health, this is unusual for us. It's actually a CRO, so that's a contract research organization. It's a service business. Normally, we don't invest in it, but this is a vet student who is so passionate about animals, wanted to improve the access of animals to better medication. And so started talking about, well, how can we do that, and can we run clinical trials in animals with the idea that some of these cutting edge drugs could be tested in our pets. So we started talking to him, and it sort of became readily apparent that it solves a huge problem for pharma, because you can test immuno-oncology drugs in pets that have, and all dogs get cancer. I mean, it's much more frequent than in humans. And it's in an intact immune system. So for the first time, you can actually get an accurate readout preclinically. So they're treating their pets as patients. It's sort of like a semi-clinical trial operation. It's quite interesting, but it could massively improve the ability of pharma to really validate all these different drugs. Because if you look at the clinical trial infrastructure now, it's overwhelmed by the number of oncology drugs. I think it's like 760 trials are going on. And frankly, they're just experimenting on humans. They're like, let's try this first and let's do this second, you know, and it's, so we think this is really transformative for the industry. And oh, by the way, the pets might get access to medications that they otherwise wouldn't. So we like that value proposition. We don't know how much money we're gonna make. I mean, that's still remains to be seen, but we think it's an important solution. Keratin is an engineering student at Penn, went to a hackathon, and the nurses in the NICU were complaining about how much time they spend managing and tracking breast milk and manually writing out labels and checking the refrigerator, moving things in and out, and it's one of their banes of their existence. So he said, well, I'm an engineer, I'm a robotics, I can solve this. So he jumped in and kind of came up with idea number one, and we thought it was a genuinely good idea and obviously a clear need, and he interviewed 35 NICUs, and he got resounding enthusiasm for the idea. I think he's talked to Jefferson, actually. He then, between the time we offered him a term sheet and when we closed, he actually changed the whole business model. But in any event, I mean, he's a very dynamic entrepreneur. We were thrilled. He just won South by Southwest, a prize at South by Southwest, so it's fun. Cohero Health, I was just talking to somebody here. This is a smart inhaler, so it tracks whether you're taking your medication. It also can track the volume that you are emitting when you breathe it in. And then Mebius is our recent therapeutics investment. And thanks, Robin actually just introduced us. They're doing something similar to Dr. Benevit here in doing biased ligands to GPCRs. So they've been working in the mu opioid space and actually just got recent data on one of their early compounds. And it looks like they're going to be able to come up with a less addictive, or maybe not addictive at all, mu opioid, which would be pretty exciting. So we're supporting them to a lot of money. So the second category, and this is the one where we make the most mistakes. So I'd be kidding if I told you we have all the answers on this, because we don't. But you have to have the business model work, and there are two levels to that. So there's on the macro level, you want to make sure that the amount of money you need to develop the product or technology or service or whatever you're doing, you create at least 3 times the amount of money you need. So you have to be worth, at the end of that money, at least 3 times. Now, 3 times is what we need. Top tier VCs want 10 times. So there's a difference in business models. So you have to be, and the only way you can get that is either through product sales, or you have to be sold, or you have to go public if the public markets are helpful. And the other trick that makes it a wrinkle, especially if you're raising venture capital, VCs like to see it happen in 3 to 5 years. So there's a time element, there's an amount of money, and then you have to figure out if you're really going to be worth it. So that's the math at the macro level. And then at the micro level, your operating model has to work too. And this is where we see the most problems, frankly, in digital health companies. So if you have to get a customer, if you have to come to Jefferson and get them to sign on to a new app or something, it might take 12 months to get through a hospital sales cycle. And then if your product isn't very, it doesn't cost a lot, and everybody wants to keep the cost down, but by then, you may spend more money getting the sale than the product actually gets into your pocket. So the math doesn't work. And we're always trying to balance, you want to do low prices, but then you have to do high volume, and is it really feasible? And that's the sort of analysis. And we make mistakes all the time. Some of the challenges with business models, and here's a classic, the medical devices, the thing that drives me nuts, and I think a lot of people fall into this trap, they think it's a 510K is basically the FDA approval and people come to us and say, oh, well, we only need $500,000 and we can get a 510K approval and then we're going to be on the market. And it's like, well, yeah, but by definition, a 510K says you're the same as something that's already on the market. So, well, what are you going to do with that? And how do you think you can be successful racing to get this approval without having any basis for differentiating yourself, showing you're faster, better, cheaper? So we actually, and maybe it comes out because we're used to developing drugs, but we're not thrilled by these fast-to-the-market approaches. We think it's a false sense of progress. We'd rather see a plan that says, no, we're going to need more money because we have to do clinical trials and we want to do this. And that's how you get to a successful market launch. IP barrier, that can be tricky in the med tech field. You know, engineering devices, they can be engineered around, so you do have to think about how robust is your IP barrier, although here we have an expert in John Caldwell here who can answer questions afterwards. Diagnostic, this is one that makes me so sad because our healthcare system desperately needs diagnostics. We just have to have better ways of identifying who should take what medication. But unfortunately, the cost to develop a diagnostic is almost as bad as developing a drug. But you don't get paid. You just don't command the kinds of prices. And every diagnostic company that has tried to do something, it takes forever to get reimbursed, and then it's at a kind of low amount, and they barely recover their cost of development. It is a systemic problem in our sector, and I don't know how to fix it. I mean, I don't know how to fix it, but it means that we have to really be careful about diagnostic opportunities because we know that it's very difficult to get the reward at the end of the day after you take the risk. Research tool companies, we've done this a couple times. We've invested in a few research tools. We have not made any money doing it, so I don't know how many more we're going to do. The problem is it's very low prices, it's very low margins, and I think small companies aren't really equipped to do the kind of massive sales. So again, it's kind of a business model issue. On the therapeutic side, most of the time I actually think the business model works pretty well, because even for rare diseases, there is a prospect of getting, handsomely rewarded at the end, because the market understands that if you're the first drug to treat us, even if it's a few patients, you can make some money. The two areas where I think we do run into problems are gene therapy and cell therapy, and that is a big thing in our region. But they both have issues around manufacturing and the sort of the practical aspects of how do you get the product made. So, and it's very expensive, and you have to raise $50 million and build a plant, and it's a real barrier, I think, to people like us doing it because we don't have enough money to really support that kind of activity. Digital health, we kind of talked about. The problem is in digital health, you don't have the IP protection for the most part. So figuring out how you're going to have a competitive advantage, can a small company really get the customers and lock them in, and are they long-term contracts? And there are a lot of aspects. It's a very important sector here. It's not that easy, though. I think that's what I'm learning, is it's not as easy as it looks. So, but we're all getting wiser. And then finally, the right team, and you probably hear this all the time. This is the hardest thing for us because nobody ever comes to us with the right team. I mean, it just doesn't happen. Most of our entrepreneurs are first-time CEOs. They haven't done it before. If we're dealing with an academic technology, you don't have, you're an academic investigator, so you're probably not the right person to be the CEO or an entrepreneur to take it out. So we take a lot more risk on this one than a lot of investors. A lot of investors say, man, I want to know that you've been a successful CEO, you've made money, and then I'll start talking to you. This is where we probably have the biggest divergence, because we will take a chance on people, and we do all the time. Sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't. But the kind of team we look for, and early on, you probably only have 2 people at most. I mean, you don't start with 6 people around the table. We do think industry experience is really important, and we value that, and we actually will try very hard to find the right people. If you don't come with the right people, we'll try and find them. And if the chemistry is right, it works out. It doesn't happen often, but we do. It's happened in most of our recent investments. There's been a connection made. The kinds of things we really don't like to see, husband-wife teams. That's always interesting dynamics. We've invested in a few, so it's not an absolute rule. Every rule I've said we break. But we are a little cautious about family dynamics. The team of convenience, I think this happens a lot, especially with academics who panic and go, oh my God, I'm a scientist. I need a business person. And oh, my next door neighbor or the person down at synagogue is an accountant for the dry cleaner. So here's my business person. And we go, oh God. We'd rather see you with nobody than the wrong person. It's much easier to come sort of alone, and then we'll try and help you figure out who you need and what kind of skills. And frankly, most of the time, you don't need accounting at all you can have a bookkeeper for 2 hours a month, and that's all you need. So we have a lot of experience doing that, but that's the knee-jerk. People just panic and marry the wrong person, and then they have to get divorced, and it can be ugly. So we don't think it's a good idea for academics to be CEOs. I'll say it right now. Once in a while, I think now maybe in the digital health we're seeing that more. As I said, the students obviously are, but we would not do that in a traditional regulated product where you really want experience having done that. And sole founder, we just don't recommend that because it's sort of lonesome. If you don't have anybody to talk to, we really do think you should partner because there's so many questions you have and you want somebody to bounce them around, and we can do that to a certain extent, but it's not the same as having your partner. So we don't recommend a sole founder. So, am I okay on time? Okay. For those of you who want to plunge into the entrepreneurial world, there are some great free resources where you can just start reading and sort of seeing what's going on and seeing what kinds of things are being invested in, and these are a couple of them. PitchBook News. PitchBook is actually the database I was talking about. It's pretty good. It's very venture-focused, and it tends to be a little bit more tech-focused. So if you're on the tech side, that's fine. There's a whole host of fierce publications. So Fierce Biotech, Fierce Pharma, Fierce Device, Fierce, there's something for everybody. And they're quite good. Everybody reads them. If you're in the industry, everybody reads Fierce every day. So you just got to know, because they tend to be the ones who are breaking the news. So pick the one, just go on their website and pick the one that seems closest to what you're working on. They have, I think they have like a bioinformatics. They really, every week they pop up with another one. Faster Cures is interesting. It's more foundation oriented, but this is where you see where the disease foundations are that are actually being entrepreneurial and sort of reaching out and trying to solve problems by supporting research. So Faster Cures has a good newsletter. It has a slightly different angle though, so depending upon what you're looking for. BioSmart Brief is pretty good. That's the big bio, is the big trade association for biotech. It's more pharma-oriented though, so that's the focus. Big 3 Bio, I'm very jealous. This is a pretty new publication that just started in Boston, and I don't even know who got together and organized it, but they aggregate all the information from their region. And unfortunately, there's a lot going on there. So I find myself reading this, wishing we had something comparable here. But it does do it. Oh yeah, because journalism is like my forte. Yeah, if somebody is journalistically inclined, it would be an interesting thing. I'd probably sponsor somebody to figure out if you could do it. So those are just good to sort of check in, and that's where you'll start to see informally or on an ad hoc basis, like who's investing, what kinds of funds. Oh yeah, one statistic I mentioned, and this is why it's important to read all these things. I looked at the deals, the Series A deals done last quarter, in the last quarter of 2016, and of the 100 so deals that were done, only 19 were done by what I call traditional venture capital. So there's just this other world out there which you really have to be aware of. It's these small funds, it's local funds, it's specialty funds. So there's, as I say, there's a ton of money, but you have to. But the only way to find out is to start reading some of these things and see who's, what's that fund? I find every day I'm learning about people, including some around here that I've never heard of. So. This is the life sciences map. It's for those, I think it's Pennsylvania lifesciences.org, I think. But you can click on all these different spots, and it's divided into companies and CROs and research institutions and incubator space and all that sort of thing. So it's a bunch of different resources. You can look at medical device companies versus pharma companies. It's hard to keep up with this, so I don't know how we do a newsletter. We can barely keep this one up to date, but it's a starting point. So if you're looking for just an easy place to look. And then we're happy to help. We talk to people when you're way too early. We're happy to do that. We're happy to bounce around ideas. What if you do this? We actually would prefer to talk to you when it's too soon than when it's too late, before you've spent your NIH funding and answered the wrong question. So this is what the team here does. They know they can knock on our door. We'll sit down and talk to you. We'll come down and meet with you. So we'd love to. We want to put our money to work, and it's not doing any good sitting in the bank. So send us your deals. And with that, our website's there, contact information. I have cards here, so I'll be happy to answer any questions.
I know we have budding entrepreneurs in this audience. Who's ready with a question?
Or I'll stay around afterwards if you're shy.
Thanks, Barbara. Just curious what kind of retrospective analysis you guys do at the end of the, year, quarter, to try to map predictors for the future. And if it's been consistent, if there's something you've really nailed down, if you do it at all.
Well, we look at, have we missed a deal? We do look at that, and we almost never do. So that's one thing we look at. So I don't know what that means, but we also look at why we've turned down companies, and we do try and look at trends. And that varies by year. So one year it'll be lack of technical precedent, not enough data, not enough proof of principle even to do it. So it's just too early. Some years it's like the management teams, we just didn't like it. So that varies by year. I can't say there's a consistent trend. And sometimes it's the risk reward doesn't work. You just can't get there from here. There are some spaces that are uninvestable, unfortunately. That's the other kind of big thing, even though, so here's an example. I was just talking yesterday. Sepsis, sepsis is a huge issue, huge medical issue. And everybody who's ever tried to solve it or intervene has failed. So the venture world has basically said, forget it, we're not doing it anymore. But you need to solve the problem. So that's the kind of thing where we'll look at it and go, oh, God, is there alternative financing? Who do we know? Are there foundations? What's going on with the NIH? So there are some things that the market has just said enough. Alzheimer's right now is like that. We have 2 Alzheimer's startups that are just dying because nobody else will come in and fund them. It's a really tough space. But God knows we need it, right? So.
Thank you, Barbara. That was a very good talk. So you didn't mention repurposed drugs. In academic institutions, we have a lot of research going on with repurposed drugs, with even spices, for example, compounds that were never drugs to start with.
Curcumin and, yep.
So how does BioAdvance feel about that?
Okay, so if I didn't say it, this is what we do. We try and figure out what the guys ahead of us, the bigger guys, are looking for, because then we can fund it and know that there's going to be follow-on money or a pharma partner or something like that. Right at the moment, and 10 years ago, we were doing a lot of repurposed drugs. Unfortunately, our market, the people that we have to sell to or develop our drugs for, everybody wants, I call it the shiny bauble theory. They just want the new, sexy, hot new target, even though it's way more risky. But that's the trend right now. It's like everybody wants something novel, composition IP, that sort of thing. So we're struggling now. We're looking at one pretty seriously for a derm application. Like in derm, you can sort of get away with a repurposed drug. It's a tough market, and you have to find the alternative path because traditional VCs won't fund repurposed drugs. And pharma's not that interested unless you get it all the way through phase 3, and then maybe they'll do it. But, how do you develop it? So that's one where there's a little bit of a disconnect, I think, in the market. And I'm sad about it because we love de-risked opportunities, right? What's not to like? So,
Hi, Barbara. I come from the usability, user experience side of this.
okay.
So I loved what you said about talking to customers. But does your program also encourage, or possibly through affiliate, to encourage these startups to keep talking to customers after they have
Yeah.
money for the sake of good usability,
Yeah.
good user experience,
Yeah.
et cetera?
yes. And in fact, the breast milk management company I'm talking to it's a constant, he's on version 5 of his software, and he's constantly doing betas and demos to get that kind of feedback and then go in and tweak it. So yeah, it's a big part. I don't think you could be successful without doing that. So. Yeah. Oh, did you see him? Oh, okay, good. Oh, cool. Okay.
Hi, Nick Delmonico with Stratos Labs. Can you just talk a little bit about the idea of a paramedical device, something that's maybe not necessarily a true medical device of sorts, but the data can be used for a digital health purpose to benefit providers? I think about, for example, like a cardio, which is an ECG
yeah.
monitor, for example.
We call that digital health.
Okay.
I mean, like wearable sensors and yeah, remote monitoring kinds of things. That's pretty much in the digital health. Now, but the trick is, how do you validate it? How do you prove that you can change outcomes? How much money is it going to take? Do you have easy access to the data? So it's putting together all the jigsaw puzzle pieces is key.
Thank you very much, Barbara. I have a question about the interface of the science we do and the politics of regulation. And my question is, from your perspective, what is the average time horizon that you look at? And it relates to my question from the regulatory standpoint. One person, when it comes to regulation, one person's hurdle is another person's protection. And I wonder
Yeah.
where you and your colleagues are in that area of thinking.
I'm probably more of a sympathizer for the FDA than I am a complainer. And I've been in biotech companies before, developing drugs and things like that. And I look back now, and I'm kind of horrified by some of the things our company tried to do with the FDA. And the FDA was, being rigorous. And we were going, yeah, but, come on. And so I actually have a lot of sympathy for the FDA. I think they screwed up the medical device world a little bit, and that's been troublesome because they didn't have clear pathways, and they still don't, actually. They now have this murky area for medical devices, which is called de novo, which means you don't know what it's going to take. So clarity is really important from the FDA, but I don't really complain about, I don't think they're awful people that are trying to stop people from making drugs. Our time horizon is long. I mean, I think our time to exit is about 7 or 8 years, and only 7 or 9 products have been approved by the FDA, and we've been around for 13 years, so that gives you kind of an idea. It's we're more patient, though. Our business model, since we're evergreen, we can be a little bit more patient, which is why we can start a couple years earlier than the rest of the world and still be okay. But yeah, did that answer your question?
Thank you, Barbara. I just want to ask, the decline in the investments from venture capitalists, is it unique to this area or this region? And why is that? What could be responsible for that?
Well, I think nationally, actually, the amount of venture capital is up. So we are losing our share. Other places, there is a big sucking sound going to Boston. When I got started, when BioAdvance got started, Boston was a med tech company, a med tech region. They didn't do therapeutics at all. And all of a sudden, like one pharma company goes up and everybody decides they all have to go up, and all of a sudden it's a pharma world. It's like, and they hire from here. So they bring all the people from around here and take them up to Boston. So there is a little bit of a herd mentality. So when you're up in Boston and some of the VCs are up there, it's easy, and they don't have to go anywhere else to invest because they have a pretty good ecosystem. So I think some of our share has gone to Boston. I think some of our share has gone to New York. New York is making huge inroads. They jumped I think 5 positions up on the ladder just in the last year. So I think we just have to try harder. I will say, I go to conferences around the East Coast. I don't go too much on the West Coast. I never see Philadelphia companies presenting. I never see them. It's like, well, what's wrong? What? Get out there. That's the only way. You got to get out there. You can't just wait for money to come here. That's not how it's done. So there's a little bit, I think it's on us. We just have to work harder and get more visible. But I go up to New York all the time, and I never see Philadelphia companies presenting. It's a 45-minute train ride. So.
Anybody else want to wrap this up with a question? Otherwise, I hope you're all showing up to Jazz Tank, because you got to go out there and make it happen. Yeah, Barbara's going to be there. Barbara will be part of Jazz Tank,
Yep.
so we feel lucky to have her.
And I'm happy to stick around for a couple minutes. I'm taking the subway, so I don't have a train schedule.
Thank you, everybody, for wrapping up this session with a terrific speaker.